We good?
We are live. Just one moment, waiting for the video feed. And yeah, we are live.
Good to go.
We are good to go.
Hi, folks.
No, not yet.
No?
Ready, go.
Hi, folks. Good?
Yeah, we're good.
Welcome. This is our 6th YouTube live workshop. This is this is Saturday, April 19th, if you're in Africa, Luther. Friday, April 20th for everybody else. Sorry about the mix-up. Really excited about what we're doing tonight. I can't believe we didn't do this the first one. This is going to be on workbenches. A lot of people just getting into hand tools. First thing they recognize is you have to have a bench. There's a lot of stuff out there about various benches, and I'm going to share with you what little I know. I've made a lot of benches. I probably have made somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 of them. I really enjoy it. One of my favorite things to do. If it was more profitable, I might still be doing it. And I got all of my information from hand tool experts, guys who actually earned a living building furniture primarily with hand tools, or at least they incorporated hand tools a lot. So it's not theory and conjecture, it's actual experience. Oh, sorry. You want to turn that off?
No, not you.
No, me? Oh, can somebody go turn that fan off so that it's not quite so loud?
He doesn't know how. Okay, I'll do it.
Anyway, I want to the way I want to do this, I want to start with my original bench, which is over there. I'm going to show you some of the features. I'm going to show you what I discovered didn't work very well. Then we'll talk about this bench, which is my current bench. I can't see improving on it because I had 30 years with that one, so all of the issues were dealt with in this one. And then we're going to talk about our economy bench. This is going to be the bench that for people who are just getting started, this is a fantastic bench. In fact, we designed it how many years ago? 5 or 6 years ago? And we use it in our classroom now because it's just a great bench, and I don't mind saying. Before we are in getting started, I also want to bring to your attention the Purple Heart Project. And if you've already heard this, bear with me. We bring in 28 combat wounded veterans every year. We bring them into our shop here, and we treat them to a week of very intense hand tool workshop. We cover all the basics, learning to sharpen hand planes and chisels freehand, how to set up a hand plane, how to use it so that you can make a board flat, smooth, square on all 6 surfaces. We literally teach them the skills that they need to build a piece of furniture with just hand tools. Quiet woodworking or peaceful woodworking, whatever you want to call it. No dust, no danger, no noise. We work them hard. We're in the workshop at 8 in the morning, and we stay here till 11. We bring our meals in. That's a Monday to Friday. It's called Training the Hand. Our next class is April 6th. It's right on top of us. May 6th. So we are scrambling to get the shop ready. This will be the first time we're teaching it here in New Brunswick. Every time we teach a class, we have 7 civilians who come as paying students and 7 combat wounded veterans. As I said, the veterans come in as our guests. We cover their airfare, their hotel, their meals. We send each vet home with approximately $2,000 worth of tools so they can continue to do this at home. If you would like to participate, if you would like to donate to be part of this, I do this because of the way it makes me feel. I feel I have an obligation, a moral obligation to help these people who have put their life on the line and now are living with the effects of that for the rest of their life. And they did it for me, they did it for you. So I'm not begging for money. I'm saying if you would like an opportunity to give back and you want to do that, go to our site, robcosman.com. Under the PHP, Purple Heart Project banner on the top left, in the drop-down menu, it'll tell you all about what we do. There's also a donation page. Please don't donate through YouTube. They take 35% of your donation, which is way too much. Do it on our website, and the only thing we lose is the credit card fee. All of the money's collected. We do not take anything out of that for administrative whatever. All of that is either buying a plane ticket for these guys, paying for their hotel, contributing to the tools or the meals, whatever it happens to be. So I want to give you just a quick tour of where we are. Every 2 weeks when we do this, we give you a little bit of an update. We're a little bit closer. You got enough? So because we need this to be wheelchair accessible, a lot of the guys are on wheelchairs. We had to take the bathroom and convert it. So we're in the process. How far can you get?
Nope.
That's the extent of it?
You can go a little further.
You go a little further. Come in the room.
Why?
come in the room so they can see it. So my wife picked out the colors. It's kind of a mint green. It's very calming, apparently. It hasn't calmed me down any. Trim is almost done. The floor, we decided last time we would have told you, this building had a piece added to it. So there's a 2-inch lip right here. And I just kept thinking sooner or later somebody's going to take a header on that. Well, we're in here working, and that corner is 2.5 inches low. So we're having to shim the benches. I said, we just can't live with that. So Tuesday, they're coming in. Between Tuesday and Wednesday, they're going to pour a new floor that will level it up with this right into the bathroom, and everything will be just perfect. So next time we film this, this room should be finished. The lighting is all in. The drop-down power supply on top of everybody's bench should be done. The floor will be done. It's going to be what are they doing it with it? I forget. Sealing it with it'll be a light gray color. Anyway, so that's that. Come in here and I'll show you what else we've been doing. We have to get 6 more benches built. So we have spent the last couple of weeks working on benches. The reason why the topic came up. So there's a bunch of the trestles. There's a bunch of the stretchers. There's a bunch of the tops over there. We'll talk about that as we get a little farther into this. All right.
Super Dave said, what'd you do, take a break after he left?
Yeah, well, if you'd get your butt back up here so we get something done. Your wife has been trying to pawn you off on me, and I keep saying send him. Special, is Luther on?
I haven't seen him. Ahmed's on. Super
Ahmed,
Dave's on.
how are you? Got a little shout out to my friend Ahmed down in Southern California, who's coming to the workshop in October. By the way, if you're thinking this might be interesting, this is the response that we're getting is second to none. I've been doing this since 2001, and we would never even have people inquiring about the next class before the first class was done. But we have 14 civilian spots available for October. October 7th class has 1 spot left that isn't paid for, and the October 14th class has, no, there's 2, 3, and I think there's 4. So there's 4 spots that are already sold, so there's 3 spots left in that one. So that class will be filled before we even teach the one in May. Back to Ahmed. He's been our supplier of beautiful wood. Sent me a box of some of the most incredible woods for making marking gauges. He's got some chisel handles that we're going to actually start selling, and they're just gorgeous. All right, you guys keep the questions going because I kind of want this to flow based on what you guys want to know. But let me start by promoting something. Oh, one more thing. So we have T-shirts. These are our Purple Heart T-shirts. They've got the really cool logo on the left breast, and on the back, wood is good. So we have them in small, medium, large, extra large, and double X large. And I want to tell you something. The sizes are a little bit small. We have 3X large now too? Coming? Okay, they'll be here Tuesday? Wednesday. So I'm 5'7.5", I weigh 180 pounds. I normally wear an extra large, but I took a large. It would fit fine, but when it shrunk after being washed, it's a little snug. So if you're over 200 pounds, you definitely need extra large, maybe even a double X. So just bear that in mind, because we've had a lot of, if you've been waiting, we ran out of larges, and a lot of those people I've called and converted them to an extra large. All right, now we'll get benches from here on out. So this book, called The Workbench Book by Scott Landis, Taunton Press, those are the guys that do fine woodworking, is probably, in fact, without a doubt, it's the best workbench book that I have ever read or had, and it's where I got the ideas for my bench. It gives you the plans. Now, they're not terribly detailed, but it gives you the plans to build probably 8 or 9 different types of benches. There's the shaker bench. There's a Frank Klaus. Just a second, I'll count them up and see. Ian Kirby bench, which is a very simple bench. There is the Michael Fortune bench, which I now use a part of that. There is the Frank Klaus bench, which is the first bench I built. That's one we're going to talk about. That's one where I've made some changes since. Did I miss one? No, that was probably the most detailed one, maybe. And the shaker bench, which has a lot of cabinets underneath. Okay. And then it goes through and it just talks about various features Really good book. Excellent. If you want the ISBN number, if you want to find it, Jake can hone in on it. I think this was published back in the, I assume it's still in print. It should be if it isn't.
Who is the author?
Scott Landis, published by Taunton Press. Okay, so I was at BYU. This was my last year, and I wanted to have a decent bench. I had been working on what they have in typical schools, which would have been a bench that had a vise on each corner. That means while you're working, somebody else is shaking the bench. Not a very successful way of having it. I was a teaching assistant, so I had a bench to myself, but it still had a lousy vise. And if you're stuck with a lousy vise, that's any kind of a vise that is attached to the bench, and it has 2 bars underneath that guide it while it goes in. The problem with that is you always have, if you want to put something in the vise, Jake, did you actually? That stuff is binding it up terribly. Megan, would you go out and get some the 2 pieces of bench hardware? You know, our good stuff, 1 of each.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, the big heavy bench hardware that's in the bottom that we sell.
Underneath the DVDs.
Wrapped up in bubble wrap. And one of the Schoberg ones. So if you have that traditional style of vise, you can only put your board in so far because you've got bars underneath there. So you clamp it in like this, and people's reaction is always, in order to tighten it up, they tighten it even more, and if it's not loose, they tighten it even more. Well, all that does is cause the thing to rack. That means it's going to twist like this, and this side is going to wiggle loose, and it'll only be tight on the inside. Nothing worse than sawing and having that thing vibrate. So what I figured out was I added a new jaw. That's supposed to be wax. It's more like glue. I added a new jaw, and the jaw tapered. So it went from the back side would have been perpendicular to the way the bench closes, but the inside would be thin here, and it would get thicker out toward here. So now when you put and I ran it way out here, so as you tightened the vise up, it would get tight here first, and then as you continued to tighten it, and as it would rack, it would eventually come in and get tight here. So at some point, it would be holding the board secure all along its width. And that satisfied me for a long time. However, it wasn't the best. So I decided to build Frank Claus's bench. Now, for years I thought it was great. There's a few things I noticed right away. And the first thing was that I didn't pay attention to the dog hole spacing. So if you look at these, no questions?
Nope.
Everybody just enthralled with what we're talking about?
For now, yeah.
We got anybody out there?
Yeah, we have around 250 right now.
Okay. Remember, we shout any T-shirt sales. We shout out their name and any donations. As I mentioned, we're using these live things as a means of raising money for a Purple Heart project.
Jonathan said, "What should you use to lubricate your vise with?"
Whatever Jake didn't use. He put some. What did you put on there?
Wax.
With what in it? Because it's tighter than. I would if you put anything that stays wet, it's just going to attract dust. So graphite would probably be a good idea, but then it gets on your hands. So I would just put a paste wax and then wipe it off. Did you wipe it off?
No.
Can you
We always have to wipe the wax off.
Can you just hold a second? Your microphone battery died. I just need to replace the batteries.
So you can't hear me?
I can hear you a little bit.
Where do we get new batteries?
Is there 2 double A's over there, Megan?
On the wall. No, not the other.
Good thing we have helpers.
Oh, there's the charger bay.
Yeah, just 2 of them, please.
I got them.
Megan is Jake's wife, John, just so you know. It's not your microphone, it's my it's mine. It's
You
my
want the batteries?
it's my receiver, yes.
You told me to. Oh, I see. The receiver. That
The
picks up my
wireless
microphone.
receiver, yeah. Thank you. Just give me 1 second.
Tell me when we're back. Good?
Yeah, we're good. All right. Sorry.
Okay. Where were we?
Something about a vise.
Oh, not rubbing.
Yeah. You got to wipe the wax off. If you leave the wax off, it just gets all caked up. Anyway, so let me share with you what I thought was good and what I didn't like. First of all, this is called the scan. Oh yeah, so let me just give you a little bit of a background on the bench. If you think about who are the most prolific hand tool experts of the last 50 years, I would say three. I'm going to give you three. I'm going to give you Alan Peters. You may not know as well, but Alan, I think, was the best designer craftsman of the last century. He was my mentor. Frank Klaus, who's still alive, and Tapered, who's dead. And these three guys are really represented the pinnacle of hand tool woodworking. Frank's known for his dovetails. Tapered was known for his hand tool methods. Both of those gentlemen went through a traditional European apprentice program. And all three of those guys used a Scandinavian shoulder vise for supporting their work when you're dovetailing, and some form of a tail vise. So I get these questions asked all about with this Rubo bench. I hate that thing. I got stuck working on it once over in England when I was doing a show. Terrible vise, terrible bench, could not stand it. And I'm going to hear all the hate mail now because everybody loves it. But no, that's not the bench that I would choose, and I'll give you some reasons as we go. The first and the biggest reason is with the Scandinavian shoulder vise, you have no obstruction in there whatsoever. And if you want to make this vise a little bit longer, you can make it as long as you want. When you wind that in, it presses across the entire width, so your board does not move on any corner, holds it securely. You have to have a little tail, so the vise jaw right here has a little tail underneath here. And that's what keeps the thing from flopping like a propeller when you're spinning this. It's designed to have a little bit of side-to-side slop or horizontal slop so that if you put something in there that's not parallel uniform thickness, parallel face and back, it will still hold it firmly. But you don't want any slop like this, and I'll show you how we've solved that problem. What else can I tell you about it? I think just the biggest feature is you have no obstructions down underneath here, and you're pressing across the entire width of the board. Nothing moves. Stay rock solid. This big arm is a little bit complicated to build. Now, when I built this, I was somewhat limited in the materials that I had. So they had called for the top to be a full 3 inches thick. Well, I didn't have that much material, and I couldn't understand for the life of me why you would need it 3 inches. So mine has been surfaced probably 5 or 6 times, and I'm down to 1.5 inches. I think it was 1 3. I can't believe it, but it was probably 1 3/4 inches when I started. And you could flex the bench by pushing down when you were planing on one end. And then that's when I realized, wow, they were right. It needed to be that thick. Go back here for a minute for the tail vise, or the shoulder vise.
I got a couple questions just when you could finish this, but
okay. So this piece, this arm, really needs to be robust. This is not big enough. Again, it's all I had. This is almost 2 3/4 by 3, and well, it was 3 3/4. On my new bench, or my latest bench, it is a piece of maple that is 3 1/4 by 4. So I really beefed it up because this thing would flex. You didn't have to tighten this very much in order for this thing to really flex. Now it's supported. There's a couple of bolts here that go all the way through. No, they don't. They go to about here, and you have to have them on there in order to keep this joint together. What do you? I have some questions in case it's.
So the first one was, how do you feel about a Moxon vise for joinery? MOXON.
Yeah. I'm really big on convenience, and that's not a bad feature if you're trying to adapt a less than desirable bench. A Moxon vise is essentially has 2 screws, one on either side, and you tighten them up, and it squeezes your board in between. And that would certainly suffice in certain circumstances. But as far as I like to have my bench so that everything is just really easy, really convenient, really fast. and that's why I don't think you can beat this. But certainly that Moxon attachment, and for guys that are getting a little bit older and they're having a hard time bending down, it's nice to be able to raise that up too. So that's another big feature of it. So yeah, I mean, if that's what you want to use, then that's a worthy and useful adaptation to a bench as far as being able to hold your work. What else?
So I'm sure you'll...
Who asked that?
That was Blake Mackison.
Okay, Blake.
Oh, we had a donation, $1,000 from John Davis
Did we really?
for the Purple Heart Project. $1,000.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, forgot to mention that. So thank you, John. I'm sure you'll tackle this, but how do you accommodate, if you have a solid top workbench made of fir or, say, pine, how do you accommodate the expansion and contraction from humidity changes while fastening the top to the leg assemblies?
Okay, I'm going to park that. I'm going to take that one just a little bit farther down. I want to go through this because we're going to talk about that.
And another quick question is, why do you have both square and round dovetails?
that you're a little ahead of me too on that. I'm going to get to that one too.
All right.
That's all part of the what was wrong with this bench. So just a quick recap. This arm needed to be a lot heavier than it was. The bench top itself needed to be a lot thicker than it was. And trust me, I would never have believed that you needed something 3 inches thick, but you really do. You want this thing to be rock solid when you work on it. There's nothing worse than pounding on something. I often have to work on some of the cheapest benches you've ever seen when I'm demonstrating. And you pound, you're pounding with your chisel and the thing is bouncing back. Terrible. You just want really solid foundation. This is your reference table. Everything you do is, the quality of it is going to be dependent upon the bench. How flat is it? How stable is it? And that'll work its way all the way through your project. So do not scrimp. Make sure you get a good bench. Make sure you build a good bench. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about dog hole spacing. So when I built this, and if you have any more questions on this part of it, I'm going to introduce you to some new hardware that we had made, because the hardware actually, let's finish this. The biggest problem with the hardware that was available, that's why that thing, see how sticky that is? No wonder I can't move it. I have to take that off with some lacquer thinner or paint thinner. The hardware that was available was so sloppy that when you wound it out here, the thing would just go up and down. So you'd be sitting in here and you would be trying to keep your board. If you've watched me cut dovetails, you know how I set that in there, set it to the top, be flush with the top of the plane, and then wind it closed like this. Well, that jaw would be drooped down like this, and as you would tighten it, and it would right itself, it would lift the board up, and it was just a real pain. And there was nothing you can do with it. It was just really sloppy machining. This, what do we call this part? The knuckle? This knuckle, I redesigned this. And my friend Paul Hatin up in Ontario, who's a genius, he makes a lot of the stuff that he and I design things back and forth between us. So I had the idea, he turned it into a product. But the way we designed this knuckle was to prevent any droop, but it would still allow for side-to-side slop. Maybe we'll take this apart and I'll show you, because we now offer this stuff. We have it custom made and it's fantastic. We also went with a double start thread. I'll show you that over there. So that was the big problem with the hardware that was available. I've retrofitted better hardware in this since that time. And I'll show you the improvements when we get over there. So that was a big issue. Okay, I think I can leave that alone. If I think of something, I'll come back to it. Now, the dog hole spacing. I don't know how many times I could tell it that I would be just thinking that was going to tighten up, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm out of movement. I can't have no more movement here, and I'm a 1/16 of an inch shy there. So that used to drive me nuts. But that was my dog hole spacing. These things must have been 7 inches. They are 7 1/8 of an inches apart. Way, way too big. I have since modified them, and on this bench, they are 4 inches apart. And I moved this one up quite close. So that was the problem, and that was my own fault for just not paying attention to how important it was going to be. So to try to come in and to mortise out a hole in a bench that thick, because this is the dog strip. So this piece, which is from here over, is a full 4 inches thick. And you make this dog strip into 1, 2, 3 pieces. So I took this section, and using the dado blade, I cut all of these holes And then when you glued it together, it completes the hole. And they're canted, by the way. They have to be on a 3-degree slope, so that when you squeeze a board between the two dogs, if they're perpendicular, the pressure will allow a little bit of slippage this way, and then your board pops out. So to compensate, you have to have a 3-degree slope on this side, facing this way, 3-degree slope on that side, facing this way, so you can tighten it up, tap it with a mallet or a hammer, and bring it down tight to the bench. But the spacing was wrong. So I could not go in and I could not modify that by cutting out square holes. So the easiest solution was to go in and drill them out and use the round bench dogs. But the problem with those is all they have to hold them in place is a little bearing that's spring-loaded. Well, it doesn't take very long, and they've got a flat face, so that bearing is always in the same spot, and eventually it just gets to a point where it wears a little groove in there, and it'll no longer hold itself in place.
You could be using the Schoberg ones.
Which ones?
The round Schoberg.
Actually, good point, Jake. So if I was doing it again, or if you have a bench that needs to be repaired, is it on this bench? Yeah. We now have these, and this is the Schoberg round bench dog, so it's got that wire that goes the whole way, so that solves that problem. And they've got a slope on the face, so you can bore perpendicular holes because it's already compensated for in the face. So that actually is a good solution. I didn't have these available when I did this, and I don't want to refit it now. So the bench dogs, at least the first couple of feet, I'd have these a lot closer, and you can space them off a little bit as you get back here. On the movable tail vise, I had the first one way back here. I would have liked to have had it up much closer, but it interfered with the joinery. And these ones, traditionally they were put in there, but I rarely ever use them. I'm going to turn the bench over. I'm going to show you the tail vise and how it gets put together and why I didn't repeat it, because even though it's traditional, it was an absolute pain in the butt to build. Questions? No?
Yeah. What did Ahmed say? How do you keep your shoulder vise from sagging? Actually, that was from Kirby. How do you keep your shoulder vise from sagging?
Well, put that over there on the other bench, please.
While you're thinking of that, Tom Maxwell bought a T-shirt.
Thanks, Tom.
And George Adams donated $100 to the Purple Heart
Thank you,
Project.
George. Certainly appreciate that.
Yeah.
We're going to do one of these live sessions when the vets are here, so these people can.
Tony Martin wants to know what glue you use.
Who's Tony Martin?
What glue you use in laminating up the top.
Tony. Tony got it right. He's actually on the right night. See, Luther did that on purpose to you, Tony. He put it on the 19th, knowing that being an Aussie, you're a day ahead or a day behind. Tried to throw you. Tony's a good friend of ours. Tony's helped us get the Purple Heart Project started way back when, 3 years ago. Tony and Luther were here in September. We had a workshop, and I certainly hope he comes back. Good friend. Thank you, Tony. What kind of glue? I used, what did I use? I did this a little bit different. I'm going to direct that question a little bit later. And the reason is this part of the bench was one solid piece of wood. I would never do that again. I now do it up in segments. And the problem is that this thing, you'd think it would stay flat, but it does not. This bench was built in I started in 1988, completed in 1989. We were in Utah, so it was extremely dry. Brought it home. I don't know how many times I had to take it apart and refit the vise to get it to work. I don't think 6 would be an exaggeration at all, because you never wanted to take off too much. So typically you're going to have, everywhere you live, there's going to be a cycle of humid and dry. But the problem is that the years that it's dry, you're going to get a year that it's really dry. And the years that it's humid, you're going to get a year that's really humid. So to try to think you're going to be able to do it once is almost impossible. So multiple times I've had to go in and refit this, never wanting to take too much off in the humid season to prevent it from being too loose in the dry season. So I got a fair bit of slop, and there is some flex. This is the traditional tail vise, and I'm going to show you how it's done. We're going to flip this over. Just so I don't forget that. I probably used Titebond but actually I don't think I did. When we did that one up and there were several sections glued together, we used a two-part adhesive. It's a boat glue, so it's waterproof, and it's a powder mixed with a water. And I'll just, little word of caution, follow the directions. You always put the powder into the water. You never put the water into the powder. Put the water into the powder, it'll never get mixed. And it takes forever to mix. You want to really have one of those electric mixers. Get all your container of water and just keep dumping the powder in and letting it dissolve and mix up. It's a tricky stuff. You got about an hour's open time, but that's not really true, because if you coat a board with a thin layer, there's no way that you're going to be able to put that together in an hour. You got maybe 4 or 5 minutes before it starts to skin over on the top, so you got to be pretty quick. The good thing is it's securing time. So if you coat a surface, get that other piece on it right away, coat the next surface, get that piece on it, and then you still have lots of working time to get it squeezed together. But you can't leave it coated and out in the open for very long, or it just won't, it'll skin over, and then you lose your tack. Okay, so I want to flip this over. How are we going to do this?
Eric Rice donated $250 to the Purple Heart Project.
Thank you, Eric.
And
We certainly appreciate it.
Barry Searfoss bought a T-shirt.
Thank you, Barry. Wear it proudly. Okay, so what we want to do, Irvin, this is Irvin. He's our urban cowboy. He comes from Toronto. He was Frick's best friend growing up. He's not anymore. And he's just here visiting. So you got to get on that end. Now what we're going to do is, now we're going to move it over a little bit more, and then we're going to pick it up on this end, up like this. Okay? Now, that's all right. Now we're going to lay it down like this, and then we're going to move it over.
You know, if you really mess this up, we'll have a viral video on our hands.
All right. I took those sections out. Thank you, Megan. I purposely did that because a lot of times I wanted to use the bench as a clamping call when we're doing a chest of drawers. So I went in and modified this so I could do that. I'll tell you a little more about that later. Okay, let's look at this. So this is the, look at how many times I wiped the glue off my fingers. I thought I never did that, but I obviously did. So this is the traditional tail vise. So what you have is a big square. So these were put together, reinforced with dowels. There's some screws in there as well. So here's the problem you had. This piece right here has a slot cut in it. This piece, which is secured from here to here, is going to expand and contract seasonally. This piece does not. It's not going to move in its length, right? So you get that to fit perfectly, but at some point it's going to bind. Same goes here. This piece is going to expand and contract this way, but the slot cut in this piece is not. So I had to take this apart several times by removing this piece and go in and just scrape a little bit off of here and a little bit off of there and put it back together and try to get it would just perfectly work, and then only to have it bind again on me when things swelled. It's we dovetailed. This corner's dovetailed. This corner's dovetailed. There's somewhat of a half lap, something or other going on here, and the same thing over here. But that had to be perfectly square. This took a long time to build. I mean, you wouldn't think it, but in order to get everything absolutely precise. There's the original screw that I used, which the quality didn't really matter on this one, other than the fact that it moves too slowly. That's the reason why that double start vise is so nice. And I put leather jaws on the inside to protect the workpiece. Now, the one thing that I am missing, so on this one, I've got a set of jaws here on the shoulder vise, and I have a usable set of jaws here. I gave that up for this Wagon-Wheel style vise, but there's some huge benefits, and we'll share that with you. But that's one shortcoming on the transition we made. Now, if you look underneath here, what else do I have to show you? So this piece of wood is going to expand and contract constantly. So you have to allow for that. So you can see how there's a slot cut in here. So this is made fast out here. This one has to be able to move. So I'm not tight here. That allows this piece to come in or go out. and I've got a slot. I've got a lag bolt going through a washer in a oval-shaped hole that'll allow for expansion. Same thing on this piece. This bench used to just sit on 2 dowels. Now I went in and modified this. I'm just looking at this now, trying to remember what I did. Part of the problem was that I didn't have this whole area. This whole part was essentially unsupported. So I went in and I added this piece to it, just to give some more support there. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else we did. Here's your nuts and bolts that hold the end cap on. And again, this had to be made so that it allowed for expansion. So these holes that bolt goes through are larger diameter than the bolt itself. So this one is made fast, meaning if that's a 3/8 bolt, that's a 3/8 hole. If that's a 3/8 bolt, it's probably sitting in a 1/2-inch hole with a washer underneath it to allow for that seasonal movement. See, you'd never want anything to come this way because it's going to jam up your vise. So all of your movement is designed to go that way. Throw the questions at me, Frick, if somebody's got something to say and I'm not thinking of it. This little bench stop was kind of I put it in there. I don't know how much I actually used it, but for planing up against on small pieces, it's actually quite convenient. In fact, I'm going to show them that when we flip this back over. Here's your tail that has to fit in this opening. So when this sits on top of the trestle, it has to create an opening that doesn't have a lot of slop, and that helps control that twist as well. There's your threaded rod that goes back to here. This keeps everything tight. And I added another one down in there. I had that one, and I think I added this one after the fact because it didn't take much to separate that joint. Now, I put these pieces in simply because you'd go to clamp something like this, and you'd want to clamp in farther, and there was just a big open space. So I added that in so you could clamp up against it. The tool tray is made fast here. So this is a plywood tool tray, and the tool tray itself is going to get narrower and wider seasonally. So the plywood sits in a groove cut on this piece, and this, as it moves, as it expands, all the expansion's going that way. The bottom, or the plywood bottom of the tool tray, is attached to this, so that's going to go farther into the groove, and when it shrinks, it's going to pull out of the groove. So you had to make sure that the groove cut on this back end was deep enough to allow for that movement. You can never have anything come up tight. That's why there's a gap here. That's why there's a gap there. You always had to allow for that movement. If you didn't, you're going to suffer the consequences. And when I dovetailed that, I went in just for a decorative, add a little extra strength, but also dress it up a little bit. I pinned all those dovetails, even on the bottom. This was a refit. That's why you see some stuff going on here. I used some new hardware on there. The stuff that I had, as I mentioned, was pretty terrible. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the base. This is not the original base. The original base was done with through wedge tenons coming through here. It was quite complicated. What I don't like, we can't walk down there because I still have that base. We used it on another bench. But I didn't have the material thick enough. So the base was made out of about 1 3/4. And even though it was sufficiently strong, it just didn't look beefy. So I switched to using this. This is 2.5 inches thick, and it just has that right appeal. But this came off of a bench that I used to travel with. So while all of this work are mortise and tenon joints, double mortise and tenon. So there's 2 tenons on the end of this going into 2 mortises in this leg. It increases the surface area. It really drastically changes the leverage on the joint, makes it very strong. But because this came apart and went together often as we were traveling, it was just a simply captured nut in here, a bolt going through this end. So I took that and I modified it to fit this bench. And the trestle over here is designed like this. It's got this 3rd leg on here to sit and support the arm portion of your Scandinavian shoulder vise. Okay? Oh, let's talk about the bench dogs. So there's the bench dog. It has a little piece of ash in a slot, but the slot is also ramped so that there's a little bit of flex on there. But the problem is, again, that they would only hold it in in position for a certain amount of space. I can't even get it to go up in there. Once that got either below or above, it would no longer hold it. So I've improved the design. I'll show you that when we get over there. Instead of flipping this over, I'm just going to tell you this. This is a really nice feature because you could bring that up above the surface, and if you had to plane something really thin, you could have that sitting there just a 1/16 of an inch. So it was a nice feature. I kind of wish I'd put it back into this bench. Okay, any questions on that traditional bench? No?
Well, Bruce asked what's your opinion on the width and length of the perfect bench, but
Oh, well, yeah, let's address that. When I built this bench, I thought, wow, that's awful narrow. I mean, I built it right off of Frank Klaus's design. So the actual working portion of the bench is 17 3/4 inches. I thought, that's not very wide. But then once I built it and used it, you can't plane out here. I mean, even planing this far away is hard. Your ideal planing zone is about 14 inches out from this face. You get out beyond that, and it's almost impossible to do. So I have never wanted for a wider bench. I love the tool tray. I've had friends beat me up on that it's just a place to collect junk. But you know what? I'd much rather having it falling into the tool tray than onto the floor. And that does offer some support on the outside. Something else that I didn't, that I modified on this bench, the outside portion of the tool tray, I made it considerably thicker when I built my second bench. Actually, how many other benches did I build? I built one of these for Dave Tennant, a friend of mine in BC who now lives in Nova Scotia. Joseph has one that I built. So maybe 4 of these. I thought there was another one. I built one for Ivar Nielsen in Ontario, and maybe even one more. So I built several of these now that I think of it. I forgot all about that. But I beefed this up, made it a little bit thicker. And just because you can see how much this flexes, never liked that. So, and we also if we can flip that one over, I'll show you how we modified this to make it considerably stiffer. Now we got to actually move this out of here because we got to bring in the other bench when we talk about it, but we'll figure that out when we get there. Okay, so let's come over here.
couple questions.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of the Paul Sellers workbench?
This is my favorite bench. This, I think, is the end-all, be-all for hand tool woodworking workbenches. This is the best. And I go back to who were the real experts that did this for the last 50 years. And those 3 guys that I mentioned, Alan Peters, Tapered, and Frank Klaus, all used this style of bench for a reason. And why would you want something any different? Now, other people have different ideas, and if you're into more power tools and hand tools, then you're going to want a different style bench. But for hand tool work, don't think you can beat this. By the way, let me give you the length on this. It is 81 inches of working surface. I can't remember what Frank's was. It's in the book. But that was, there's always times that you would have liked to have it a little bit longer, but this was a good working length. I've made them shorter. I made them shorter to travel with. And what did we end up with on this one?
Frank wants to know what about...
Who was?
Well, Frank wants to know about the height. Is there a specific, or does it depend individual?
Yeah, this is 81 inches as well. So obviously I stuck with that. Height. Frank Klaus, I think, is about 6 feet tall. And I actually have and I'm 5'7.5" in the morning. I use a taller bench than Frank does. So it's totally up to the individual. I'll give you my height. I'm 36 1/4. And I think that one's the same. I prefer a little taller bench. I'll tell you the 2 things to consider. If you're doing a lot of planing, it's nice to be able to be on top of the plane. If you're doing a lot of dovetail work, it's nice to be standing up more upright. I actually put feet on this bench that would allow me to raise it up or lower it. And how many times have we used it, Jake?
Once.
Once. In fact, I even thought about taking them off. So maybe I might change my mind as I get a little bit older, but the thing to do is to, if you have a bench now, is just play with the height a little bit and see if you stick some blocks underneath it, see if it's a little more comfortable to work. But I don't think there's a standard other than what I just mentioned, those two considerations, planing and then some things like dovetails. What height do you want? Oh, you know what? Got another thing I want to tell you. Forgot about. Irvin, let's flip this over again. So let's go.
Do you fasten the top to the legs, or is it?
So, well, the way this was done, this always was done, is that there was a dowel hole here and a dowel hole here in the center, and there was a dowel in the bottom, and that was fine. But we moved it around a lot, so we now actually, I put one lag bolt up through both trestles, and just so that when we move it around, we'd be at a wood show and somebody volunteered to help us. The next thing you know, they're lifting the top up off of the base. So this solves that problem. Okay, so we're going to turn it up like this, stand on its edge, and then we'll be able to flip it around again. You ready? You got the heavy end, by the way. Okay, now down. Now you got to go to you. Okay, move it this way a little bit until you'll feel go that way. Keep going. You should feel it drop in. It did?
Felt like it did, yeah. On this side, maybe on yours?
No, I didn't.
I
didn't there. Oh, that was the other problem too. You see how much hangs out over here? I sometimes would be having to stand on my bench for whatever reason, and that thing would pop up in the air. So by fastening it down, that solved that problem. Now, what did I want to talk to you? Okay, so I'm going to show you this again. This is a really nice feature, just having that little bench stop in there. It doesn't get used. The bench dogs get beat up, but this one doesn't get used very often, so it was just nice to be able to plane up against something really thin. Okay, so here's what we used to, I use a bench lamp a lot, and I had bored holes in the end of my bench to put the bench lamp in, but they really, over the years, wore these things out. In fact, I think no, that was on a different bench. But you can see how this hole gets used the most because it's directly across, how worn it is. So to avoid that from happening again, on this bench, we made a sliding lamp holder. It's nice and heavy. And I turned a mushroom. This is just because this particular bench lamp, its weak link is this rather thin piece. I actually had to Gwyn and put a piece of threaded rod. I just had threaded rod. Put a piece of rod up in there, drilled a hole, put a nut and bolt in to hold it to stiffen that up, and then it sits in the mushroom, and it just gives you more surface area when it spins and turns. Okay? So, on the surface, what did we do different? We beefed up, also went with a contrasting wood. We beefed up the outside of the tool tray. I used a solid wood bottom, but that's just because I wanted to dress it up. This is bird's eye.
What was the bird's eye for?
There's been a lot of questions on what wood is best, like hardwood versus
Frick, you're not throwing out the questions.
I was waiting for you to
Well,
stop
you can
talking.
interrupt me.
All right.
Interrupt me, because
Paul-
don't give me the question after we've already talked about it.
Paul asks.
Who's Paul?
Paul Morrison is his name.
Hey, Paul.
Hardwood versus softwood.
Oh,
Thoughts?
well, definitely hardwood. Definitely hardwood. Your bench is going to take a fair bit of abuse. Not intentionally, just accidental. You can drop things. It's just, you have to have hardwood. Beech was often the favorite, but I think maple is the best. It is hard without being extreme. You talk about something like Purple Heart or Jatoba. I mean, that's like trying to plane a rock.
Well, so you need to mention the resurfacing bit. That's what you have to take into consideration.
That's right. My benches have never been sanded. They are only finished right from the hand plane. And that's a job to go in and resurface. I mean, if you look at I guess you don't really notice it. I was going to say you can tell how many times we've resurfaced it based on how much difference there is in the size of the half pin up here compared to down here. But I've resurfaced it several times, and it's a big job to go in and resurface that. So
the series that we just released on YouTube for a few years ago was
the resurfacing of that. It's still on there now. We haven't finished it yet. In fact, you need to do the last 3 episodes.
Okay. I will do that.
So definitely hardwood, not softwood. If you have to use softwood, then you have to use what you have to use. But hardwood is definitely going to be the preference. So when I built this one, Instead of using a solid piece that is going to be subject to cupping, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces that are approximately 4 inches wide by, I had a bunch of 10-quarter material, so approximately somewhere around 2 inches thick. And what I did before I built this is all, by the way, documented.
Are those 3-inch pieces?
3 inch? Did I say 4?
I think you said 4, but I don't think they're 4.
No, they're 3. They're 3 inches. So when we built this, because it was all filmed, I would first thing I did is I got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to go for a while. Don't have Luther here telling me to shut up.
We're at 50 minutes already.
Okay. Have we lost anybody? How many people do we have out there?
I'm showing around 350.
393.
Oh.
Okay. Come on, 400. So when we built this, I took, how many extra sections do you remember?
I think it was 2.
So we had at least 2 extra pieces. We dimensioned it, and then we stickered it up in the top of the shop and let it sit there for a fair bit of time. And we had extra pieces.
I think we did that first and then built the base.
Yeah, probably. That way, if you get a piece that's going to twist after you've already dimensioned it, you don't want that in your bench. You want to have as stable stuff as possible. Now, this is expensive. This is 10-quarter maple. I think at the time it was $10 or $11 a board foot. So, you could put out a lot of money quite easily. And in fact, I think the material bill on this bench was almost $2,000. So I milled up all those extra pieces, and then when we finally came time to building the bench, we anything that twisted, anything that was no longer flat, we discarded, we didn't use. We took what we had left, we milled it down to the final size. So now it's squared on 4 surfaces, cut to length. Now we had to assemble it. And you want to assemble it so that when you have to replane it, to refinish it, everything's going the same direction. So I took each piece and I planed the top edge. And I determined which direction I should be planing, and I identified it. So that when we assembled this and put it all together, all those pieces were heading in their own direction. Somehow we screwed up and I got one turned around. So there's one obstinate board in there that always gives me grief when I have to resurface this.
Have we resurfaced it?
Well, when we did the very first time after we built it. Now, there's lots of details to give here. Each one of these boards has 2 grooves cut on the face. So if this is the board, I have an 1/8-inch groove cut here, and I have an 1/8-inch groove cut somewhere around here. And all of the referencing was done off the same side. So if this was my face side, the one that I just planed, I cut a groove with here's the table saw fence. I cut a shallow groove this way, did all of the board, and flipped it over and cut that one. So now you have your board that has a groove on this side, a groove on this side. Did all the boards. Then I moved my fence over, and I went in, and from that same side, I cut this one on this side, flipped it over, and did this. So that there was no way that those things were going to get off. They were all going to be perfectly centered, or at the same distance from that same edge. And then we went in, and we put our splines. I made a mistake here. I'm going to tell you about it. We put our splines in, and I glued the splines in the same side of each piece. So when it came time to putting them together, you didn't end up with 2 splines facing each other, which would have been a nightmare. Plus, you didn't have to deal with that while you're trying to glue everything up. So the splines were already glued in one side of each piece. What the mistake I made was the splines ran full length. So I put the glue in there, and when we're trying to squeeze this thing together, there's nowhere for the excess glue to run out. It's trapped between 2 splines and nowhere to go. If I was going to do it now, I would have done it in sections. I would have had spline, gap, spline, gap, all the way along there to allow a little bit of that glue to squeeze out. We had 100 clamps on here trying to close that gap, and we get a few gaps in the wintertime. They open it up right along here. It's closing up again because it's getting closer to the humid time of the year. So that's how we put all of those pieces together, and that pretty much, it doesn't eliminate, but it certainly lessens that ability or that tendency for a thing to want to cup over time. Okay, fire the questions at me while we're on these topics.
Don't forget to explain your walnut accent strip.
Oh,
Keith
who
says.
said that?
Keith Wares.
You must already know. So you see this strip right here, this racing stripe? When we built this bench, we ended up with a crack right down there. Oh, it was devastating. This was my pride and joy. When I first brought this thing home, I would put a bed sheet over it at night when I was done. A little bit crazy, I know, but I mean, nobody was allowed to touch this bench, and I can't believe it would ever end up looking like this. And by the way, the the ramps in here, which make it easier to clean, have to have a gap. See this? Look at this gap. It's an ugly gap. But that does not change the dimension, this piece, because the grain runs this way. So it stays in sync with this. But this has to allow for movement. So I've solved that problem in a really cool way I'm going to show you about over there. What was I going to talk about here? Oh, so anyway, so we end up with a gap. And what am I going to do with this gap? So we already had an accent wood. We had the jaw was a different colored wood. The pegs, yeah, that secure the dovetail. The spline right here for this top piece that was mitered. And I think originally the end caps of the handles were that wood. So I decided to go in and inlay this racing stripe. Well, you know what? That really came to work in my favor, because when you set a piece of wood in the vise like this, all you have to do is eyeball it, get it parallel to that racing stripe, and now it's level. So it works so well that when we built this bench, we purposely added that stripe in there for the very same reason, and it's a great feature. Now, we went in, and I don't remember why we did this, but we did it here as well. We threw a lot more contrasting wood in on this one. That backboard is mahogany. The ramps are mahogany. The tool handle, the vise handle is mahogany. That stripe is mahogany. This was a piece of mahogany. The racing stripe is a piece of mahogany. The bench dogs were. So it just seemed to fit. And I think that's the reason why we put that in. By the way, when we did it, we were careful. So this part of the stripe, the grain is running this way, so that it's in sync with this piece. Going to expand and contract the same. This part of it, the grain is running this way, so it's in sync with this piece of wood, so it's not going to change or fight it. And the same thing down here. This piece runs, the grain's running this way on that particular piece. All right, so first of all, the design changes, or the modifications that meant something. The only thing we did different here is we went with a double start thread. So here, for example, let me show you on this. So I'm going to measure 1 inch out. So to move 1 inch, we have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 turns. On this one, with a double start thread, to move in 1 inch, we go 1, 2. Okay? So really convenient. That thing just whips in and out. It's so much easier. Plus, it lessens, the leverage is different. That means that you don't put as much torque on this arm, because the same amount of pressure, and you just get to a point where you apply the same amount of pressure automatically. The same amount of pressure applied to hold that over here is going to exert more force because of the extra threads that you have. So great feature. And I need to make a correction, because I thought it was Paul, but it's actually a local machinist, friend of mine that did some work for me that told me about this double start thread. So, and I apologize, because last time I didn't say his name. I thought it was Paul, but it actually was this fellow that lives up in just not far from us, up the river. Okay, so he also made this stuff for me, and Jake and I polished it all up. So we've got the double start thread. This was the original jaw. Actually, he made this. Paul, another correction, because it was Mike that actually came up with this idea, or between the two of us, we came up with this idea to end up with not having this kind of slop, but still allowing some movement on the horizontal axis. So like I said, you can grab hold of a piece that doesn't necessarily have parallel faces. Now this big bolt, big nut. So in order to prevent the droop, I thought, okay, well, we'll just, instead of a short nut, we need a long nut. So this nut goes way back in here. So there's lots of thread contact. So when you're up here, or when you're all the way out here, you don't have, there's very little movement, slop on there. Now, I want to show you something. I'm going to sell you on something, but I'm going to tell you about it, how I came about it honestly. When I was installing that nut, and this thing was milled out of a big piece of 3-inch diameter brass rod, which costs a lot of money. So I had to drill a hole, a fairly large diameter hole, all the way into this piece of maple, back to about right here. And it had to be perfect. So I'm using a 3-inch or no, it wouldn't have been 3-inch. How big was it, Jake? Do you remember?
It's a 2-inch rod, isn't it?
That's a 3-inch flange.
1.5 inches.
The rod's 1.5 inches, so it's probably 2.5 inch. So 2.5 inch diameter hole. So I'm using a 2.5 inch diameter Forstner bit, and I'm looking in there, and I said, what in the name of blaze is going on? The hole was moving sideways like that, so you look down in this thing, and it's all stepped all the way over. Stupid piece of crap. And it was just a bad bit. The centering point's not on the center, so it's sliding over. So then I got introduced to these. Now, these are fish bits, and they cost a bloody fortune. But these things will drill a hole that is so precise that you can cut. I show this on a video. Drill a hole with it, cut it open, and look at it. It looks like somebody's gone in there and polished the inside. It is so precise. They're made in Austria. We carry them on our site because we use them. This will be added soon, in fact, right away. That I don't even want to tell you what that costs. And if you have to ask, you don't want to buy them. But they are the most precise wood boring bit that you will be able to find, and they drill perfect holes. And when does it matter? When you're doing something like that. I can't remember what I had to do to correct it, but I ended up with a hole bigger in diameter than I wanted because of that. So instead of that nut sitting tight in the hole, it's the flange that's actually keeping it in position. Not that it's a big deal, but that's not the way I prefer to work. Oh yeah, here's a little tip. See these rubber O-rings? If you don't put those on, every time this drops like that, this will end up slamming into that, and sooner or later it'll break off. So you just get these rubber O-washers, O-rings from the hardware store, put them on there, and it cushions that blow. So that's a huge saver. We have it on all of our vise handles now because we're just tired of having to replace vise handles. The dog hole spacing, as I mentioned, and we kept the first one here and the first one here a lot closer. I went with a wagon-wheel style vise. One of the disadvantages, you have permission to interrupt me whenever somebody asks a question.
Someone asked what side of your sharpening station, but I assume you'll get to that.
I'll talk about the sharpening, but you need to bring it up so I remember to talk about it.
And what is the name of the boring bits?
They're fish. They're out of now. Fish makes Chinese ones, and they make the ones made in Austria. And don't be fooled; they're not the same. You want the ones out of Austria. We have the. I'm not going to show you, but we have the brad points on our site, and they're seven bits are $120, crazy price. But when you use them, you'll be convinced. It's like, man, these things are awesome. Those things are a lot more than $120.
Just show the front there, Jake, on the camera.
Now these are the new ones, actually. I wish I could get to my. I'll show you. I'll show you what I mean. Here's what I learned the hard way. When you put a large diameter boring bit like that in a drill press, a Jacob's chuck, which is a 3-jaw chuck, on a round shank is going to, at some point, that bit's going to stall, and the motor keeps spinning, and it scores that and makes a terrible mess of it. So I'll never buy these again. So now we're only carrying the ones that actually have the flats on there, so that your jaw registers on that flat, and it'll prevent that scoring from occurring. And these are called wave cutters. And when you find something that works so much better than what has become the ordinary, the standard, it's just a great find, and that was a great find.
We're over 400, by the way.
400 what?
Viewers. 422.
Okay. So you guys need to fire the questions at me to keep me thinking. I mean, some of the things that I might not think about because I just take it for granted. So dog hole spacing, as I mentioned, I got both of them close, the front one and the front one on the movable jaw, so that I can clamp something as short as 3 1/4 inches.
People have asked about the height of the sharpening station.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to talk about the sharpening station in a bit.
And what adhesive do you use to attach the leather to the vice jaw?
Just regular glue. Regular glue will do it.
Regular wood glue?
Regular wood. Sorry. That's why.
Elmer's?
Not like
Elmer?
white school
Elmer? Elmer? I use Titebond 3. I should be doing a commercial. Titebond 3. Any yellow or white wood glue will do, and it doesn't. It'll hold it on, but when it comes time to changing it, it's not hard to get it off either. So, big advantage there. You might want to size the back of the leather first. That means take some glue, mix it with 50-50 water and glue, paint it on the back, and let it dry, and then glue it on, and that'll prevent the leather from soaking all the glue into it, which will make for a weak joint. Okay, so we talked about the bench top itself, how many sections it made. It still has a dog strip. The dog strip is done separately, so my dog strip on this one is from here to here. And that way, that allows you to cut these with a dado, leaving it open on this side, and then you glue it together. Now, there's splines on all of this, double splines on here, probably the same thing on there, I don't remember. I want to talk about this, but I want to hold off for a minute.
Continue talking about dogs.
Yeah. Okay. So, I got to screw up something every time I do something, I build something, and that dog hole is right on top of the trestle underneath. So it will not go all the way down. So what I had to do is make a little short one, and I had to make a little thing here. It's broken off, so that I could reach down. I could put it down below, but I could still get it up there to be able to use it. I did the same thing over here. This one is, actually this one, I managed to miss it enough, but I was able to go in with a chisel and chisel out some of the materials so I could do that. So.
Bruce wants to know, do you use holdfasts as an option other than
No,
dogs?
no, I never do. I've used them before, never on my bench. And I see people clamping boards down when they're chiseling. If I'm chiseling dovetails, and I've got my chisel on my mallet, I'm not pounding like this and having the thing slide down. I'm pounding straight down like that. It's not moving anywhere. We also have to remember that I was trying to feed, we have 10 children now, but at the time I was building furniture for a living, we had up to 6 children. And I'm trying to feed these people from what I can produce in the shop. I had to do things as fast as possible, and I still think I only made about $5 an hour. So to have to fool around with that, and I've seen how pretty quick people can use a bench holdfast, but I've never needed it. Alan Peters didn't use it, so I didn't use it. I know some people do, and I have no complaints if they want to use it, but I don't use them.
Show them how you constructed these bench dogs.
Oh, bench dogs. Okay, so the problem with the bench dog was getting it to stay in place at any height. So here's what we do. I thought it was a little bit ingenious. It involves some ballpoint pens. So I
Sacrificial.
Yes, sacrificial ballpoint pens. So I cut a T-slot in the bench dog. And the way I did that is the first cut I made with a straight bit that went to the bottom and all the way to here. The second cut was made with a T-slot cutter. And I think I have it right here. I'll show it to you in case you're wondering what it looks like. If you want to see what about $3,000 worth of router bits looks like, in fact, 3,000 is probably a low number. It's one of those, it's like clamps, one of the most expensive things in your shop by the time you're completely outfitted. Somewhere in here there's a little T-slot cutter. And I probably won't find it until after. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so there's what it looks like. It's you wouldn't want to go in there and make one pass with that because it's too hard to get it to clear the chips. But if you go in first and do as I did, which is cut your slot, then carefully go in. Now it's a little bit tricky to do too because it's cutting all the way around. So you got to hold that securely. But that'll go in there and it'll cut that slot out for you. And then I took a piece of babinga and I made a T-shaped piece of babinga, if you can see that. And it had to be obviously T-shaped, but it had to be smaller than this T. Then I drilled a hole in the middle of this dog, down about that deep, one here and one there. And I drilled a little bit of a hole, maybe 1/8 of an inch deep, in the T at the same point. Then I took the springs out of a ballpoint pen, 2 of them, and I compressed it. What did I do? I compressed it down into, I put it in this hole and in this hole in the bench dog, and then I slid this over. How did I do that? How did I do it to prevent it from getting caught in the first one? I did something I don't remember. Well, I think what I did is I probably had something underneath here that allowed this piece to slide over so that, see, what you eventually want are those springs to catch in the little partially shallow holes in this. That's what holds it in position, keeps from falling out. So if I had a piece of metal, thin metal slipped in there to hold that spring in place, allowing this to slide over, and then remove that piece of metal, and then when you get it into position, the springs will hit the 2 little holes at the same time. And I got a little chamfer cut on here so that it would allow it to go in. But then at any height, that holds its position. Isn't that cool? We'll do a YouTube of making these.
I got a couple questions.
Okay.
Actually, they're both from John. First of all, do you seal the wood with anything? If so,
Which wood?
The bench top, I'm assuming
Yeah.
he means. If so, is there a specific product and process? And he also wants to know if you like it super smooth or do you want some kind of grip on it?
No, I'd like to have it perfectly smooth. And I do. I use Irvin. Do you want to go down there and find that Tung Oil? Do you know where it is, Jake? You have no idea what you're looking for?
Over there, in the corner.
It's like a big yellow.
Over here. Oh, I got it. Never mind. I've been using this oil for a long time. Somebody told me you can get it in the U.S. I thought it was only available here. It's made by a company called Circa 1850. It's Tung Oil. I just love the way it feels when it's done. I cut it about 50%, maybe 20%, with mineral spirits or paint thinner, just because if you're putting it on a bench this big, by the time you start over there and finish over here, that's already gotten tacky. But you want a finish on it for 2 reasons. Number 1, you want to at least slow down the absorption of moisture. And you want it done equally, means you want it on all the way around. And number 2, you want to prevent, keep it from getting dirty, and you don't want glue to stick to it if you happen to spill glue on it. And there's some dirty marks on here, so it hasn't worked 100%. But I think on the bottom, what I did, I actually sprayed the bottom just because it was more convenient. And then I just applied Tung Oil on the face and on the edges. And it really makes the joints come out nice. I trimmed this all with bird's eye after the fact, so.
For what reason?
Looks. Well, I've had access to some beautiful woods over the years. One time back in the late 90s, company in Halifax called Maritime Lumber. No, not Maritime Lumber. Can't remember the name of the company, sorry. East Coast Hardwoods. They had just bought a barn full of bird's eye maple that was cut in the 1920s in northern New Brunswick. It was part of an estate sale. And the guy that owns the company called me up and he said, Rob, this is the best. I've been in this business a long time. He said, this is the best bird's eye I have ever seen. He said, the only way to describe it is it's polluted. Well, I bought enough. I ended up having a commission to build a blanket box for somebody for his wife. And I bought enough and a little bit more. And when the stuff came in, you couldn't set a bird's eye down anywhere without touching an existing bird's eye. It was polluted. It almost looked like a different species. It was so good. Anyway, I don't have any of it. It all went into somebody else's house. And I finally said, well, why don't I save some of this? So I used some of the best bird's eye I had, to trim this out just so that I had something pretty to look at when I wanted to. So that's why. All right, so bench dogs, make sure your holes are close enough together. Make sure they're canted at 3 degrees this way and 3 degrees that way on these ones. I use bird's eye on these ones, again, just for contrast. There's a, maybe you'll be able to see it a little bit better with the two different types of woods. But that's a piece of babinga, by the way.
Did you say the size of the dog holes? The size of the dogs, rather?
Oh yeah, actually that's an interesting point. So when I did this, I didn't want your dados. The typical dado that you buy will only allow you to cut 13/16. 7/8. 7/8? I can't remember. So if you go beyond 7/8, that means you've got to make 2 steps every time you cut it. And you don't want this one to be tight, this one to be loose, this one to be impossible. So what I did is I took my dado set, I put some spacers in, so one pass would give me this. And you really can't get much beyond it. So these are 1 inch by 15/16.
Your microphone went out again.
Mine
Or
did?
actually, yours did this time.
My batteries are dead?
I can still hear you, so you can keep talking, but
Well, is it just turn off or it is?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, double A
there's
there.
2 more. They're sitting right there and then.
and I also believe the camera or the battery on the camera is about to die too.
So do we have that?
Well, I just put
Well,
it
we're
on
having so much fun. We'll keep going. I'm not done. I got lots of life left in me. Let's just fix this problem. You guys are getting a live session. What do you expect?
if I cut the video, can they still get audio?
Yeah, if the camera goes out, we can replace the battery and it'll come back. But we just put that other battery on the charger, so I'm not sure how long that one will last either.
Let's keep going.
Keep going.
We'll be like Kramer. Test driving.
Did these go the same way?
No, they don't. They're not. I don't
Do you
think
know
so.
how upset Luther would be if he was here?
Class goes to them.
Tell me if I'm back on for it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good now. You're good now.
Okay. What are you doing, Butterfingers? Okay. Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Where were we? Bench dogs.
Size of them.
Size them.
Size of them. So they're
Yeah, you measure.
lengthwise. These are 5 inches by 1 inch by whatever I said, 15/16. And I made these out of probably it's a mahogany substitute. It's no, definitely not Spanish cedar. It's probably sapele or something like that. And these ones are bird's eye maple, but they both work fine. They get beat up over time. I mean, you can see the face of that's quite beat up. That's why you want a really hard wood. So it's probably time to make some new ones of these. And they get knocked around on the corners as well. You want the face. I keep this nice. I chamfered here, here, and here, but you want this face nice and sharp because you want to be able to grab something small. This one's full of dust down there. That's why I can't get that all the way down. But you want to be able to grab something small, so if you've got a chamfer on there, you won't be able to do it. It'll slide over the top. Okay, let me go back over here. What did I do different here? I made a little different tab on this, and I cut it round up here on the top so that it would move and not jam up on me.
This is more of like a tongue than a.
Yes, yeah. And that moves nice and freely. Love that double start thread. Thank you, Mike. Oh, that speed. That's awesome. And that knuckle. So I'll just show you this real quick because Paul up in Ontario now makes these for us, and we just got a shipment in. There's actually 2 of them. See, this stuff is gorgeous. I mean, look at that. It's just so well machined. And there's the knuckle. So this would be, see that? So that gives you just a little bit of side-to-side slop, but no slop this way. And now those little brass rings are just in there for fun. Now, these are not polished like these are, but we did that ourselves with a buffing wheel and a lot of, actually you probably did it.
Elbow grease.
Yeah. So this is for the shoulder vise, and we do a separate one for the tail vise. So on the tail vise, you want this slot to be really narrow because I want as little surface area as possible where the board is unsupported. So if I'm planing something, I don't want a big open gap that leaves the wood unsupported. So I actually, the new hardware, this is the original stuff, I think we're down below 2 inches. We might even be at 1 3/4 inches. But so the only difference on the other piece, the tail vise piece, is this is squared off and this is squared off so that it'll fit down in there. And we shortened it too. You don't need a big long nut here, you only need a short one. I actually went in and cut that. I think the other one, the ones that we sell now might even be smaller. This is on the inside, by the way. And it's not drilled into there for some reason. I think it was just too hard to do. It's sitting up on the surface. But I still have, when that's wound out all the way, oh yeah, I want to talk to you about the opening over there too. So I have 5 3/4 inch of room on here, which is plenty.
Super Dave said that Luther put time limits on the battery.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. Did he check in?
No. John suggested that you make a video about how to make your bench dogs.
Yeah, we are going to.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do that, John. We're going to do it a YouTube. So when I yeah, some good stuff coming out here. So when I built this one, I thought, well, you know what? I need lots of capacity on this. And I must admit that I sometimes when I'm planing the side of a drawer, I'll put it in here. So on this one, I have 5 3/8 inch capacity. But I would rarely ever use that, rarely. And you're just leaning over a whole lot more. Well, not a whole lot more, but more. So when we built this one, I think we made it smaller. I might be wrong.
No, I think you did.
Yeah, we're 4.5 inches. So you're a little bit closer to the work. People have often said, well, isn't that in your way when you're trying to cut dovetails? No, it actually works very nice. In fact, oftentimes I can rest on it right here when I'm doing it. So not a problem. But you don't need great capacity in here. It's just, it's not something you're ever going to, you're rarely ever going to use, and there's usually an alternative way of doing it as well. Okay, bench dogs, shoulder vise, I think we're done there. This tail vise, this is actually, if that took me 4 days to build, this took me 4 hours. So what you have, this is called, I don't know why it's called a wagon-wheel vise, but it is. So there are different types. There's one where this stays put, meaning this doesn't move. There is a nut over here that as you move this threaded rod, it stays in position and the nut simply slides along it. I don't mind this winding out here. It's not in my way. I'm never working back there, and it's a lot less complicated. And the force from the threaded rod is directly behind the dog, the moving dog, as opposed to having it offset over in here. And it's a lot easier to build. So this block of wood is actually in
3 pieces? 2 pieces? 2, it looks like.
no, more than that. Because we took this piece. So the first thing I did is I took this piece of wood. So you can imagine this all the way down. It's 4 inches wide. Cut the 2 dados in there, and then glued this piece on. Okay. Then we took this piece of wood and we cut it right here, because there's a groove here and there's a groove here, and I have 2 pieces of cocobolo that fit in those grooves just nice. And I have a groove cut on the side of this on both places, but then I cut it in half so that, because this has to be put together when it's all in place. So there's the top half of this bench movable dog, and there's a bottom half. And if you look underneath, I don't know if you can, there are 3 lag bolts. Can you get underneath here? Do you need some light? There are 3 lag bolts, 1, 2, 3, and after you put this in place, so you put the top half on, the bottom half on, and then you put the 3 lag bolts in and you tighten it up. What's the matter?
Ricky needs the keys to the grate now.
So they're in it. They're in it. So when you squeeze it together, it holds the cocobolo in the dog strip. And I use cocobolo because it's naturally oily, so it self-lubricates, and it'll move along that track. And that's the best way I could find to assemble this thing and have it so you can service it if you had to. You can just take it apart, pull it out. Now I put a piece of bird's eye in here just to dress it up a little, even though I don't even see it. And I put a leather jaw over here, even though I rarely use this as a vise, but you can use it.
I would recommend if you put one piece of leather that you put another piece of leather as well.
I should have, well, yeah, over here. I should have, and it wouldn't have marked it up. I don't know why I didn't.
I got some questions.
We can still do it. Fire away.
It's about mostly the vise. Where was it? First of all, can it be installed on an existing bench, or do they have to be installed during the initial?
Which
build?
one?
That one.
Shoulder vise?
Shoulder, yeah.
You know, I get asked this a lot, and anything can be done. There's nothing impossible. You got to figure out how you're going to do it. You need a little bit of brain power there, but you could modify that. You could modify a bench. Slap this piece on one end so that you can secure this corner. This is just a block of wood that sits in here. We're going to try to flip this over if we have time. We probably don't. But this block of wood is, it just has to be fastened to this and fastened to this. It's got to allow it to move. Remember, this is going to go this way, whereas that doesn't and this doesn't. So I actually have, it's a good question actually, I have 3 splines. 3 or 2, I think I have 3. I have 3 splines in the end of this piece. No, sorry. I have 3 splines that are glued on the side of this center core, and I have 3 corresponding grooves cut on this piece that allow this to move this way, but it stays flush at the top. Same thing out here. So the solid wood splines, I cut the grooves. I cut it with I had a custom made slot cutter for the router bit. And so that way I could reference, when I was cutting the slots in this, down here on this face, I reference off the top. I then say the same setting I used to cut the slot on the end of this piece, referencing off the top, over here and over there. So when you put it together, everything lines up. You're trying to put 3 grooves in and get everything to line up. It's all got to be done reference off this, or the setting has to be the same. So anyway, so there's three in there, and that just works out perfectly.
We're at an hour and a half.
Are we really? I don't care. I'm having fun. How many people?
430. Yeah.
So we're not losing anybody. Are you enjoying this? How come the red light's not on?
It's all right.
Huh?
Keep going.
Because he's not actually recording with the camera. I'm recording here. What's the advantage?
So I asked them, are they enjoying this? What is the response?
Well, there's going to be a little bit of delay, so I'll read this question.
Okay.
What's the advantage of that type of shoulder vise? It seems like you're quite a distance from your workpiece, and I can't imagine how many times that handle would hit me in the wrong place. That's from Peter Valkanis.
Peter, you're too tall. This is never this. Of course, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages to any vise you have, but this has. I haven't even got to the. We may have to make 2 out of this. I haven't even. This has never been. Back up. There's advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of this so far outweigh any of the disadvantages. I put up with a lot. As I mentioned earlier, you don't need it very deep. So, you know, if I'm cutting a dovetail in this, look how fast that moves. This is perfect. There's absolutely no disadvantage whatsoever. What a lovely saw, by the way. Did I tell you about this saw? I can sit here like this. I'm just perfect. Absolutely perfect. Not in the way at all. Don't be fooled by that. Now we cut that we make this specifically for this length. So when this is closed, I've got about 1/8 of an inch left to thread. So, but you can also modify it with the thickness of your jaw too, if you needed to have it a little more or a little less. Okay, so back over here. Any more questions, Frick? By the way, are they enjoying it?
Yeah.
Everybody said no, but they got nothing else to do on a Saturday night, so they're staying tuned.
Well, some of us have to hide Easter eggs, remember?
That's why you have a wife. She's home doing that.
That'll get you in trouble.
Yeah, I know.
Get me in trouble, too.
So, any more on the tail vise?
I don't see one on the tail vise.
Shoulder vise over there. Tail vise over here.
For a left-handed person, you just recommend reversing?
Reversing,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, you definitely want to be planing this way, so everything's got to be turned around. And I made a left-handed vise for Ivar Nielsen up in Ontario, so everything was turned around.
Does the wood shavings ever bog your threads on the wagon vise?
No, never.
I thought we do clean them out.
Occasionally, we think of it. Put a little bit of wax on there. It just, it's so smooth. These ones that we sell, these are $500 a piece. Are they worth it? Absolutely. It just works so well. Now let's talk about a little more on this. So nice big dovetail on here. This is a chance to show off your joinery. I love the way this looks. I pinned it up here just for fun and make it a little stronger, give it a little extra strength to that top half pin. I didn't even talk about the tool tray, the ramps yet.
Yeah, someone wanted to know the width of the tool tray, but just
Yep.
a reminder.
Okay, I'll get over there.
Is there a reason? Is there a reason you went for one big tail on this one versus the two tails on the other end?
Well, to try to do two, I turned it around. On this one, the tail is on the arm. And that I just didn't like the look of it. I always like to have the tail. This is personal preference. When you got two different thicknesses of wood, I always like to have the tail on the thinner piece and the pin in the thicker piece. So this kind of looks like a stubby dovetail, if you look at it. So when I did this one, I did the reverse. The thinner piece has the tail, the thicker piece has the pin. Same as you would find on a drawer. Typically your drawer fronts are going to be thicker than your drawer side. So, and the geometry just worked out nice. It allowed me to get the right amount of slope without making this too small. If you had too much slope, you'd end up with a little wee narrow spot down in here. So, and by the way, I didn't want to waste bird's eye, so I've got that piece of bird's eye was glued on, so I could take one piece of bird's eye and get lots of mileage out of it. So that's got about a 3/16 of an inch bird's eye skin out here, and on here, and on here, and along this face, and along this end, and even along this side of the bench. So I went the extra mile on that. Now, tool tray. So the tool tray on this one is 6 inches. The tool tray on this one is 6.5. I don't know why I changed it, but this is plenty wide enough. The ramp, I want to show you this because I think this is really cool. We don't have any springs left in any of our pens around here. So, by the way, that's a solid piece of bird's eye on the bottom. And again, I just wanted to dress it up even though it's a tool tray. It always bothered me that you had to have this gap because this piece of wood does not change dimension this way. This gap is going to close and open as this solid piece expands seasonally. So everything is secure over here because you can't mess this up. So all of the expansion is going to go this way and then it's going to shrink back that way. So this gap is actually going to change seasonally. So what I did, I took the ramp, I cut a slot in the end of it. Got that little chamfer on there. I made a little piece of, I wish I could get in there and move it. Can't. That piece of wood right there is sitting in a slot cut in the end of this ramp. There's 2 springs in there in the slot. So this piece of wood right here, I can hardly point to it. That little piece of wood in there is probably, 5/8 of an inch wide by 1/8 of an inch thick, sitting in a slot that would be deeper than that, spring loaded, so that it stays tight to this. And it allows, so, when this thing expands, some of that will come out of the slot, and when it shrinks, this gets narrower, some of it will go into the slot. So it's always nice and tight, and you don't have a gap there. Isn't that cool?
Any advice on leveling a bench on an uneven floor?
Yeah, we end up having to do that whenever we're at teaching. So what the easiest way to do it is to bore 4 holes in the far corners underneath and put in lag screws. Large ones, 3/8 of an inch at least, and then just you can go in there with a wrench and just adjust the lag screw until you get everything leveled up. And the lag screw will bite into a concrete floor so it doesn't move around. You don't want to do it on hardwood because you really mess it up. Now I bought for the benches that we're putting out here, I bought these levelers to use. Can't remember where I got them. So there's the foot, and then what we'll do is we'll put a T-nut. We'll bore a hole in the bottom. We'll insert, it's not the right size. Yes, it is. We'll insert the, no it isn't. We'll insert the T-nut up underneath, and then that will go in, that will thread up in there, and there's a nut on there, so we'll be able to adjust it so that'll sit and that'll level it up. Okay, what more do we need to talk about on here? Let me just give you a little bit of advice on here. So there's one of the biggest problems is when you put this thing together, you want to have it as close as possible. I told you about how we oriented these pieces so that all of the planing was going to go that way. And we put double splines, cut all the splines referencing off of the same face. When we put this thing together, I think all I had to do was go in there with a 4.5 smoother just to clean it up a little bit. There was no ups and downs. This was impressively precise. Same thing here. So after the core was done, then I use a slot cutter and a router, and I use that to cut 3 slots on the end of this, corresponding with 3 slots cut in this piece. And this is called an end cap. Now when I put them together, 3 slots. So when you put it on there, it just lines it up so it's almost perfect. There's no discrepancy here whatsoever. So for about the first 2 or 3 inches, I glued all of this. I glued back up a little bit. The splines that you insert can be glued the full length in this piece because the grain runs the same way. Can't glue it onto this piece because this has to be allowed to expand. But I did glue the first couple of inches. And that bolt, this is actually a bolt, it goes up into here. So there's a nut up in here. I cut a hole in there, put a nut in. But that 3/8 inch diameter bolt is in a 3-inch hole. There's no side-to-side slop. That's put in place, and this is fixed right here. You can't have this gap change. If this gap changed, that's going to bind. So all expansion must go to my right. So by gluing this section, having that bolt fit precisely in that hole, there's no movement coming this way. Over here, the rest of it is a dry fit. Over here, if you can, I actually use double washers too, if you look down here. So the easiest way to do this is if that's actually I think it's a 5/16 inch bolt, is bore a 1/2 inch hole. And then I have 2 washers because the 2 washers will slide on each other without binding and it'll allow this thing to move just really easy. Same thing, that nut is up in there. Jake, can you stick that camera up in there real quick and see that? Or can you get right over here? I bored a hole. I bored a hole in here, and then I chiseled a flat spot on here. So there's a washer and a nut up in here, and like I said, it's in an oversized hole, so I can keep it nice and tight, but still allows it to freely move. Same thing is a little bit different down here. No, it's not. So this is glued. This is glued right to about here. And then that's dry fit, the same thing. That allows this core to move out there and come back. You know what I haven't done yet is I was going to turn some mahogany caps to put on there with a magnet just so they would hold them in place. Because occasionally you want to go in there and tighten those up. They may loosen a little bit over time just as the wood shrinks underneath them. Hi? Okay, we'll talk about the sharpening station, and then I want to talk about the base. You know what, our next, that's what we'll do, because we'll have the video ready. So our next live session, we don't know when it's going to be.
It'll be when the vets are here, right, you said?
Yeah, we're going to do it on the economy bench. I'm going to give you a little teaser on that, because it's a great bench to get started with, and you need a bench to build a bench. So my sharpening station. I started teaching woodworking. By 1999, we were starving to death. I could not build enough furniture. There weren't enough hours in the week. I was busy all the time, but we just could not make ends meet. I think my last year of building furniture, which is 1999, my gross sales were $42,000. $42,000, that was before I bought the loan. That was including, that was before I paid the power bill. That was all I had to work with. I was feeding 6 kids. Starved to death doing this.
You weren't feeding 6 kids.
Well,
You
no.
were supposed to.
Jake.
They were all skinny. They did nothing to eat. Did we have 6 at the time? When was Kenzie born?
98.
Yeah, we did. So I started teaching. I figured the only people who could appreciate what I was doing didn't want to buy it. They want to learn how to do it. So I got really serious about teaching it. And I was teaching people how to sharpen. May not be how this happened, but I just noticed that the average person learning this cannot sharpen at bench height. You got a plane blade, you got your stone, you're doing this, recognizing you're going to wear out your stone, you have to introduce to this motion. And the process of trying to do both and make an absolute mess of it. So if you move your sharpening station down low, you can lean over the blade, the stone, move your pivot point from your wrist all the way up to your shoulder. You can rock heel and toe while you're doing these little circles, so you don't have to introduce a second motion to your arm. You just rock heel and toe in your feet, and it worked. So where do I have it? Well, there's my knee. There's the sharpening station, so I'm probably 2 or 3 inches above my knee height. Not terribly comfortable. So make sure you buy stones that cut really fast. So you don't have to stay there very long. But it is very accurate. So I made this one a little fancier than this one. This one's just held on with C-clamps. All you need is a piece of plywood, glued and screwed to a piece of hardwood, cantilevered out there. You want about a 1 or maybe 2 degree slope, so all the slurry runs away from your bench instead of against it. I got a rubber sheet in here holding it. Any other questions about what did Tony ask me? He asked me about the glue. We covered that, didn't I?
Someone wants to know where you get all your wood from.
Trees.
No, it's Annette asked that, and she actually visits her parents in Bathurst. So she's
She what?
She visits her parents in Bathurst.
Oh, really?
So she'd like to know.
What's her name, Annette?
Annette.
Annette, I buy it wherever I see it because I learned a long time ago. Buy it when you see it because you may not see it again. I've got some really cool stuff here. We should do it. We should do an episode on wood. There's a piece of pink ivory. I'd never seen pink ivory this size. You see what it cost? $1,170. Now, that piece was, what, Jake, another 1.5 feet, 2 feet longer? A piece of Osage orange was $67. There's a piece of snakewood behind it, and that piece of snakewood is $230. So it's expensive wood. Buy it, get it wherever you see it. I will give you a tip. Focus up here on exotic woods. Exoticwoods.com. My friend Mel in Burlington, Ontario, has the largest collection of wood for sale that I've ever seen. His showroom is huge. Across the street, he's got a warehouse that you could put 10 of these shops into that is full of wood. And, awesome. And a super guy. Absolutely salt of the earth. Great guy to deal with.
And that's from Toronto, so that.
Oh, are you? Oh, call Mel. Go see Mel. He's in Burlington, right off of Appleby. If on the QEW, I think I turn towards the lake
Google.
on Appleby.
Google's
Google it.
great.
That's right. Google it. Google's your friend. Yeah, Mel. And Mel will ship all over the world. So if there's awesome wood in the world, Mel has it, and he's willing to part with it. Okay, so let's go down here and I'll show you what I did.
What are we looking at?
We're going to look at the risers first. Jake is a little bit messier than me, so the reason why there's stuff all over the place, it's from him sharpening. Now, I also need to talk about the bench slave. Are we allowed to say that? Somebody will freak out. Okay, so I bolted this to the top as well because I wanted to be able to come in.
Whoa,
What?
the creaking.
Oh, last time it was. So if I'm dovetailing and I want some extra height, I automatically bring my bench up to almost 40 inches, which for, you know what, this is really nice. How long has it been since we lifted this thing up?
Well, judging by the stains, I'd say.
It's been a while. So this is just, we got to start doing this. It's perfect height for dovetailing and for showing off the bench because now we can see a little better underneath it. So let's show you what we did here. This is a...
Well, you should mention that with the risers on there, it's not as stable when you're planing it.
Yes, it is.
It is?
Yes, it is. It is because that's why we have the hinges working
On the
opposite of each
outside,
other.
yeah.
So when you're pushing against that. Now I had to do the foot like that. I had to round the bottom of the foot so that when it's in the flat spot, you don't have that square piece sticking out there. I wish I had blown the, hold on a second. Oh my goodness, this is dirty. All right. So, trying to find mahogany that was thick like this was, this was before I met Mel. So this is actually Spanish cedar, which kind of has the same color, but it's lighter, and it's not a really strong wood, but in these big, thick dimensions, it's fine. So everything here is a double tenon, so that means that on the end of this piece, instead of one big tenon, there's two with about a 1/2 inch gap in between. So obviously there's 2 mortises in this. So after it's put together, and the mortises probably are 1.5 inches deep, I went in there and I pegged both, and then the opposite ones are done. Oh, that doesn't matter. I just offset them for a reason. I didn't want the pegs on the same line. You know, if there's any tendency to split it, that would do it. So they're offset. This one's a little closer. This one's a little farther down. Same thing on the bottom. And you always, to make it nice and neat, instead of having this piece the same width as this, then this ends up being flush. But I was able to keep, which makes it difficult to have that little quarter round. But you see, by having that little, it's probably an 1/8 inch quarter round, and this piece just small enough, that fits inside on the flat. Just a neater way of doing it. And I really like this style of putting it together. So these stretchers are maple, and then we were already finished this, and I said, nah, I got to add some bird's eye. So we took it all apart, and we added a bird's eye skin to the outside, the inside, and the top. There's none on the bottom. And if you look real close, you'll see a glue line right here. Nice thing about a quarter round radius is it'll break that joint, so you don't even have a hard time seeing it. So this let me just knock that out so I can show you.
There.
What?
There's
No, I don't want to hit it with a mallet. It'll dent it. Let's see if I can knock it out with this. This is a great way to put something together. So this tenon comes all the way through, and you want it to be cut fairly precise. And you need lots of material here to strengthen this. That can't be too short. So there's my wedge, and the wedge is made out of mahogany as well, and the taper on it is probably, I have no idea, maybe 3 degrees. So when you put that in there and tap that in, that is rock solid, and look how fast it is. Easy to take apart, easy to put together. Not such a big deal on this, because this is probably the first time that's been come out since I built it. But when we used to travel and we'd be going to a show, it would take a second to slap this thing together or to take it apart. What else? Not a whole lot on this. We go down here. I just dressed this up a little bit when it came to adding this sharpening station on here. Put a piece on the back side. If I could put it whatever height I want. So there's a rabbet cut right here, and then you just tighten it. So what's holding that in place is this piece and that piece are squeezing against this upright, and that holds it where you want it. I'm just going to look up underneath here real quick and see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, so if you go up underneath here, can you see, Jake? So I remember I told you I wanted some extra support. I didn't like the fact that outside piece wasn't very well supported. So I have, how did I do this? This piece right here is screwed fast here. Oblong hole, oversized holes here, here, and here to allow this to move. Mortised into the outside of the tool tray. And then you can see, if you could see up in here, there's 3 pegs. 3 wooden pegs to support that. So this piece adds a lot of support and stiffens up that outside of the tool tray. It also provides support to the bottoms, these bird's eye bottoms. And they are screwed all along here, sitting in a groove that is deeper than the tongue of the bird's eye that goes into them, and that allows for, as this core expands that way and closes the gap or the width of the tool tray, This bottom has to be able to go into that groove and pull out without showing a gap. I don't see anything else here that's earth-shattering. These filler pieces just compensate for the fact that the core is a little bit thinner than the outside. I don't know why they built it that way. Why they didn't just have that core the same thickness as this.
Probably weight.
And I can't see that being a problem, but it would have messed up this whole arrangement with the tool tray for sure. Any other questions? How long have we been going? 2 hours?
Yep.
So let me, in closing, let me introduce what we're going to do on our next one, because we're going to do this part 1, part 2. So this is our, what we call the, can you make it over here? This is our economy bench. You've seen me talk about it before if you've seen any of my other YouTubes. $100 in materials, except for the cost of the vise. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the construction of this, how it goes together. We have a new video that'll be for sale. It'll be a download only. And it's Luther and I, and then Jake and I finishing building the bench. So we have it on our online workshop, but it's 17 hours. This is going to be probably 2.5 hours, maybe 3. We'll talk about the option of having a tool tray that we can add to it, which gives you a chance to show off your newly acquired dovetail skills. In fact, somebody just emailed me and they said something about a French cleat for attaching that to the outside, which is a good idea. I'll play with that idea a bit. Talk about the Schoberg vise. So I'll flip this over and show you how it's attached, show you how we build this, show you some changes that we've made. We have built, how many do we think the other day? 30? We've made about 30 of these, so we're kind of getting the process down, and I'll share some of those tips with you as well. Whet your appetite a little bit on it. And then it's going to be right around the time of the starting of the workshop with the vets. So we'll introduce that a little bit as well. Any final questions?
Give it a second. Jesse wanted you to show the T-shirts again.
Jesse Paratus from...
Oh, yeah, he's been on us. He's been on here the whole time.
Dude! So you need to know who Jesse is. 3 years ago in March, I got an email from this guy wanting to know... Where's my fine woodworking book, Jake? Do you know? Wanting to know if I had any saws for sale that I would sell at a discount because they had cosmetic flaws. And why can't I find that? Anyway, so as the story goes, he told me about being a combat wounded Marine and lived in a small pension, but he said something that really clicked. And he said ever since he got involved in hand tool woodworking, it was the first time he found any peace from the physical and the mental pain that he suffers from. And that resonated with me because I had become accustomed to teaching 50-year-old business executives. They'd show up on my workshop on Monday, my week-long workshop, because of stress, tight as a drum. And you'd watch this balloon deflate over a week. And come Friday, when it was time to leave, they had stopped shaving. They just hung loose. They didn't want to go home. Midnight on Friday night, I'd be kicking them out, saying, I got to catch an airplane. You have to go home. But totally de-stressed. So when Jesse said that, I thought, wow, maybe this is something we should be doing for these, to help these combat wounded vets. And that started the whole ball rolling. And we reached out to help Jesse. And through the generosity of people like Tony Martin down in Australia, who really took over and helped it out, and Luther, big factor. And I can't forget Bob Lippick, who was a great friend of mine that died not that long ago. Bob's wife found out what I was doing, Barb, and she gave me approximately $20,000 to get started, to bring in that first group of vets. So that plaque is going to go right on there in memory of Bob Lippick, because this bench was going to be for him. Anyway, so Jesse and I have been in touch ever since. We've been down there. We go down and visit about once a year, and it's awesome that he's there. What did he want?
He just wanted you to show the shirts.
Oh.
To promote them.
So there's the T-shirt. That's the backside. Wood is good. RobCosman.com. Purple Heart Project was a great little logo. And, yeah, Jesse's my favorite vet. And I can't, I mean, I wish I could name them all because Joe, what's Joe's last name? How can I forget that? Joe, this is terrible.
Right.
Joe Bright, who is from South,
Southern Carolina.
the southeastern United States, moved to Southern California, and he's been really instrumental in helping Jesse and me, and just great people, awesome people. Anyway, so there's the T-shirt.
Joe Bright.
Joe Bright.
Yeah.
But I did not what I just said.
I wasn't paying.
Oh, was Joe on there?
No, it was Jesse that
Jesse did.
mentioned
Yeah.
it,
Joe's a great guy. These are heroes. These really are heroes. These guys did stuff that you just wouldn't believe, and they did it for people they don't even know. The least we could do is help them alleviate some of their suffering by teaching them woodworking, sharing a little bit of information with them, and giving them some tools so they can do something to help keep these demons at bay. So we bring these guys in, and we have a blast, and it is an emotional week that leaves us drained at the end of it, but in such a great way that you just can't wait to do it again. So for those lucky people who get to come and participate in this class as civilians, everyone that's ever done it has told me, Rob, we came for the woodworking, but we went away with so much more. Those spots in that class are coveted, and they're going to start selling out. We're going to try to figure out a way to add a fifth and sixth class to the year. We're going to do this year and see how it is, and if we can, and the response, I know the response is there. Our doing this for 28 combat wounded vets a year is not even emptying a lake with a spoon. It's far smaller than that, but it's something. And some of those guys, like Mark Oliver from Idaho, has gone out and now set up a shop himself to be able to provide this service to other vets. So there's a lot of good stuff that's coming from this. Any final questions?
Nope. Everybody just says great show. And
thank you for those who are supporting us financially. Thank you for those who are supporting us by helping us find combat wounded vets. Here's my last request.
oh, just before you get there, he wants to know.
Who?
Jack Lane wants to know how many of
Hi,
your
Jack.
kids are woodworkers besides Jake.
He counts me?
He counts. Yeah. Where's your dovetail, Jake? We just dug it out the other day. Where? Oh, can you get it? So we just found this the other day. This was Jake's first ever dovetail.
It was a shelf. I made a shelf.
Oh, you just made? Oh, you did. So it's mounted.
No, but it could be. I just
Oh.
never mounted the shelf.
None of them. But then of my 5 siblings, I was the only one that did it. So this was October 26, 2012, 100% Jake. So this was Jake's first ever dovetail.
While you got it underneath the bench, so you pull out a better one.
So that was Jake's first ever dovetail. And that was before we came out with all these new techniques
Was
that
it?
make it even easier. It was actually pretty good. I should put my glasses on. Maybe I won't. So, no. Anyway, so here's my final request. We can find the money. We appreciate your support, but we can find the money. If nobody donated money, we'd still figure out a way to do it because we're committed to this. This is our life calling. In fact, our saws, 10% of all of our saws that we make and sell go towards supporting the Purple Heart Project. But there's tons of people that have been stepped up to the plate and are helping out tremendously. One in particular comes to mind who just committed to taking care of 2 vets completely. That's $3,500 each. And he was one of the students in our last class and just felt like he needed to do more. So a big thank you goes out to him. I don't have his permission to mention his name, or else I would. What we can't do is we cannot find these guys that need the help. They tend to be very, what's the word? Introverted. They don't trust civilians. I don't know much about this, but I suppose if you spend part of your life having to live in a hyper vigilant state where letting your guard down for a minute could result in either you or one of your buddies getting killed, it's hard to let that go. So they just they tend to keep to themselves. They stay in their homes, relationships only with their immediate family. So how do we find them? Well, here's a classic example. We had a guy come down. We had all these extra pieces of maple from the landing part of the bowling alley. Killed me to just not be able to use it, but it was full of nails. Anyway, So Jake and I decided we'd cut them up and just sell them off. So we put them on Craigslist or equivalent of, and people
We
came
had
and
Dave
bought
and
them up.
Luther move them.
Yeah, and Dave and Luther moved them. That's right. And we had to cut them into pieces, and they were full of nails. Anyway, so this one guy came down who happens to be a school teacher in Fredericton High School, and I can't help but talk about this because it's part of who I am. And he said, Rob, he said, my brother-in-law, who has served several tours in Afghanistan, has PTSD terribly. He says, I never see him. He doesn't go outside the house. I said, bring him here. During the workshops we're going to have in May, bring him here. Somehow get him down here. When these guys come into a room and knowing that there's 7 other guys that they don't have to explain themselves to, you just see their shoulders drop and the just stress leaves and they feel at home, maybe for the first time since they've been discharged. And if we can get them, if we can get access to them, we can offer them help and get them into one of these workshops. We have seen miracles occur. 5 days. 5 days of working in a shop environment, and these people change. Life-changing changes take place. I only wish that the VA and the places that take care of these guys could come and witness this, because they might change their methods. It's amazing what happens. And there's numerous of you that are watching that know this, that have had it happen to yourself. So please, spread the word. Purple Heart Project. Go to robcosman.com. In the toolbar on the top left, the first thing you see is PHP. Luther's got tons of information there. All your questions will be answered. The application form is on there. All they have to do to apply is have a DD-214 if you're in the U.S., proof if you're in another country that you were honorably discharged, or you can still be serving. You have to have a clean record because you've got to be able to get into Canada. Canada considers something like a DUI as a felony, and that'll keep you out of the country. So you have to have a passport. And then you have to write us a story. You got to write us about a half a page, and you got to tell us your situation. And I tell everyone this: talk to us like you would talk to your therapist. You're not going to exaggerate, but you're not going to hold back. We're not trying to be nosy, but this is all we have to make the judgment call. Jake and I and Luther and Super Dave sit down, go through all of these independently, and come up with, we think, is our top 14 list, and then we compare notes and we fight and argue until we come up with the 14 that we extend the invitations to. We will cover your airfare. It doesn't matter where you live. We brought Ash over from Australia this last class. We will cover your lodging while you're here, and you're not going to be in any dive. We put you in a nice hotel. We will cover your meals. We'll feed you the very best food. This is the reward for what you did. Small one, but it's a reward. You're not here we're not scrimping. And in addition to 5 days of being in here from 8 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, we will send you home with the very best sharpening gear, the stuff that I use, the very best plane, stuff that I use, the very best saw, the stuff I use, the very best chisels, $2,000 worth of great tools that you can go home and get a good start with. So if you have somebody that you know that needs this, or you think it may help, please make them aware of it so that they can apply to us. I'll wrap this up real quick. Our October intake, we'll decide on that at the end of August. So you've got now until the end of August to apply. Appreciate you watching. Appreciate your support for the Purple Heart Project. Please spread this to others. We will see you in 2 weeks. We're going to talk more about the economy bench and some other stuff that comes up between now and then. Love your feedback. Thanks for being here. And thanks to all the people behind the scenes who have here to help, especially our friend Irvin from Australia.
Toronto.
Toronto via the Philippines. See you.